everyone, it's Rebecca with Beck's Fine Art, and I don't know what is going on with my hair today. It's doing some weird things up here, and I did curl it, but it doesn't really look like it. Humidity does fun things. Anyways, I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make a really awesome, that's not a watercolor, watercolor Polaroid using watercolor pens. It's super easy, and if you've ever seen watercolor pens and wondered, you know, what can I make with those? Can I do a regular watercolor painting? I'll show you how. It's also really fun and kind of addicting. So let's look at our materials. So for this painting, I'm going to be using these watercolor pens by Doodlehog. They sent me them and they are awesome. It's a really awesome set. They come with 48 colors, as you can see. Just to show you a little preview of them, and here's the second layer. They also come with 2 of these water brushes, which is fantastic. Then you'll need some watercolor paper, and to start I would suggest getting just a small watercolor sketchbook. You really don't need to go big to start. I think it's easier to learn using a smaller surface. Then you'll probably want a pencil, since we're going to make a little Polaroid outline, paintbrush, and acrylic paint for the stars, a palette, but the acrylic paint, and then tape to tape off the edges for the watercolor. So I'm actually going to just take the page out of the book. That way I don't run the risk of it bleeding through like you see here when I kept a page inside the watercolor sketchbook. So next I'm going to create the outline for the Polaroid, which is really easy, and I'm just going to use my sketchbook to draw the lines. So you can see that it's a little bit thinner up at the top and thicker at the bottom. So that's just your basic Polaroid outline. So you can see I made this Polaroid shape a little bit bigger than my original, but that's totally fine. And these are the colors that I'm going to do. So I'm going to go for more of like a greenish blue galaxy this time versus the typical pink and purple. So to start, it's super easy. You just pick whatever colors, and I'm going to start with my lighter colors first. Oh my goodness, look at this neon. This is amazing. And these watercolor pens, they really just write almost like felt markers. They are awesome. Absolutely love them. So all I'm going to be doing is scribbling this color all over the place and just switching off. I'm not going to fill in the whole square or rectangle to start. I'm sort of just going to fill in the middle section, because I'm going to do quite a few layers on this in order to get it to look a little bit more realistic, hopefully. And the edges are all going to be darker too, so that's how you also can create a more realistic galaxy. And I'm not going to lie, watercolor galaxies are not the easiest in my opinion, but that's also probably because I don't work with watercolor a lot. So really, you're going to be more comfortable with the medium that you work with all the time versus something you don't. I think that's pretty obvious. And then we'll do some of the darker bluish purple around the edges. Okay, so now that I have the basic middle done, I'm going to take my water brush, and you will need a cup of water, obviously, to rinse your brush when you're using your acrylic, but to also rinse the color off of the tip of this brush, because if I start with my darkest color and then I move into the yellow, this color is still going to be stuck on the brush, so then it's going to end up muddling my yellow a lot more than it should. So if you have one of these water brushes, and you can just use a regular brush with water too, that's totally fine. You're going to want to squeeze the tip so some water comes out. And then all that I'm doing is just kind of scrubbing those colors together and getting them to blend into each other. And this first layer is not going to be necessarily the prettiest layer. This is really just to get the start of your blending, and then it'll kind of show you where you want to go from there. So after you get all the colors nice and soft, then you can decide where you want to lighten or darken them. I forgot to tape down my painting. This isn't a mandatory step, but it does help to give you a lot cleaner edges for your watercolor, and it helps to keep the watercolor a little bit more flat while you're painting. I also have a paper towel next to me to blot off my brush when it gets a little dirty. You can blend these edges out as much as you would like. I'm not too worried about them right now though. All right, so the last thing that you want that I didn't mention is you'll need either a blow dryer or a heat gun if you want this to go quickly. So I'll go ahead and dry this off. Okay, so now I'm going to be doing basically those exact same steps that I did before. I'm just going back in where I want some colors to be more vibrant or darker, or I can even add colors to different spots if I want. So I can add yellow in places where maybe there wasn't yellow before. But I'm gonna go ahead and speed this part up because I'm not really doing anything new here. I'm just darkening areas just to give it more contrast. So you want to have some lighter areas and some darker areas, but I'm still just doing that same sort of scribbly motion and then adding colors where I think maybe they need another mixture. Like in here, I think it's a little bit too purpley, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it. All right, so now I've got my second layer, and that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily done, but I'm gonna go ahead and fill in the edges. So I've got kind of like a slate bluish gray and then black. And I like to go in with the blue before the black, just so it is a little bit of a softer transition between the colors versus just going in with straight black. It can kind of create a hard line and they don't necessarily blend as easily versus having this sort of darkish bluish gray. I think it's easier to blend in with the colors, and you can go ahead and add some of this into your colors a little bit more if you want to break up the galaxy space a little bit more. Again, all I'm just doing is that same sort of scrubbing motion, and then I'm just using the tip of the brush right up against the tape so I can make sure I have a nice clean line. But go ahead and fill in all of your empty space with that color. And you can definitely go in with black if you want. This is just my personal preference to get a nice soft blend. And then once you're happy with that, I'm just going to add black right at the very edges so you can see how much darker it is. And obviously you can go back and add more later, but I like to start with a little bit less of black in the beginning and add more as I go, because you can't go backwards. Once you add a lot of black, you're kind of stuck with it. So it's best just to start with a little bit first and then work your way to using a lot. And then of course I'll use the water brush to blend it. So I'll go ahead and blend the grayish color first before blending in the black with the gray, because the black will blend really fast. All right, so the last part before adding in any stars is really just to get this to all blend together. So that's just going to be a lot of going back and forth, using the water pen and these darker colors to really get those edges to be nice and soft. So you're going to find that it's going to be a lot of back and forth, but obviously this doesn't totally look like a galaxy yet, so it's really about achieving a nice blend between all of the colors. Alright, so once you're happy with your background, then you're going to water down your acrylic paint and you're going to flick some stars. So you can, one, either just tap your brush, the downward motion, so you can see that it's not my favorite technique to use because you can't really control it as well. Or you just simply bend the bristles back and flick the paint directly onto the watercolor. I like this better because you can control it. You don't have to worry about big splotches like that. And I find that it's a lot easier to use acrylic versus white watercolor because the white watercolor really kind of ends up blending into the background, which is good for adding highlights, but the stars, you obviously want them to be nice and bright. So in order to brighten up some of those stars, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little tool. It's meant for nail art, but no one says you have to use it for that. And all it is I just like to call it a star daughter. So you can get really nice round stars. So I can use this to brighten up any areas that I So now if you want and you have a super tiny brush, this really doesn't work unless you have a super tiny brush, is you can add some starburst. So for that, it's just gonna be a vertical line, then you cross with a horizontal line. And then if you want, you can cross it again. Just make these lines a little shorter. And you can also swirl the middle a little bit to make it look like it's glowing. So I'm gonna add a few of these, and then I'll just briefly talk about adding some trees or mountains in the foreground. Alright, so I've got the stars all finished and dried, so now the last steps, I'm going to take my black, and for this one I'm going to add just some silhouettes of pine trees, which are super easy to do, and I'm trying my best to use just like the very tip of this pen. And I'm just going to fill in the whole bottom portion with the pine trees. Let me finish part of this and then I'll show you. They don't all have to look the same, meaning they don't all have to look like healthy pine trees. Not even sure if anyone thinks this is a healthy looking pine tree or not. But you can do some that are just like lines with maybe a few branches coming off. The more variety that you add to it, the more, that one is looking weird, the more realistic it looks, the more variety you add. So go ahead, and if you're gonna do trees, just fill in the whole bottom, and then we'll peel off the tape. So I'm just going to peel off the tape now and see the damage of how much paint bled out. Oh, looks like we had a major bleed over here, and that's probably because I just didn't push the tape down hard enough over there. So honestly, if you really want it to look nice and even, you could just take some white acrylic paint and paint over the edges of this. It really wouldn't look too bad if you did that. You can also outline the whole picture in black. That's what I did with this one. It really helps to just make it look nice and crisp. But since I have that big bleed, I'm not going to worry about outlining this one for now. And then some people like to add like a word or something down here. So I hope that everybody found this helpful in creating a watercolor galaxy using some paint pens. Like I said, the brand of these is Doodlehog, and I highly recommend them. They are on sale right now for $29.99, which is $10 off what they are normally. So go check them out. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like this video. If you have any questions or comments, please make sure you post those and I will try my best to respond to all of them. And I will see you next time.